The diaper bag slipped from her shoulder for the third time that evening, and Nora Calloway did not stop walking. 4 flights of stairs. No elevator. The building had been promising repairs since August, and it was now the middle of October, and Nora had long stopped expecting promises to become anything other than silence. She counted the steps the way she always did when she needed to keep her mind from running ahead of her body. 1 through 12 turn, 13 through 24 turn. The stairwell smelled like old carpet and someone else's dinner, and she focused on that too. Anything to avoid thinking about the number in her checking account or the rent envelope sitting on her kitchen counter like an accusation. Eli was pressed against her chest in the carrier, his small weight familiar and grounding. 7 months old now, nearly 8, and he had started trying to pull himself upright against anything solid he could reach. Her collarbone, the edge of his crib, her heart, she sometimes thought, though she kept that particular observation to herself. Inside the apartment, the air was stale and cold. She had forgotten to adjust the thermostat again, another item on the list of things she could not quite manage to finish. She set the diaper bag down by the door, unlatched the carrier with practiced hands, and lowered Eli into his playpen. He reached immediately for the plastic rings hanging from the padded edge. Determined little thing. He had her stubbornness and someone else's dark eyes, and every single time she looked at him, she saw Rowan Hale looking back at her. She had spent 15 months learning to live with that. The divorce had been finalized on a Tuesday in July 2 years ago now, in a Manhattan courtroom that smelled like air conditioning and old wood. She had walked out of that building with a settlement she did not need, and a freedom she was not sure how to use, and she had driven north to Boston before the ink was dry. The city had seemed like the right distance, far enough from New York that she would not turn a corner and find Rowan at some restaurant or gallery opening, close enough to civilization that she could build something real. She had found work at a mid-sized corporate law firm in the financial district. Nothing glamorous. The salary covered the basics if she was careful, and she had become very careful very quickly. Daycare alone cost more than her first apartment out of law school. She reviewed contracts during Eli's morning nap and answered emails one-handed while he nursed. She slept in 4-hour intervals and told herself this was temporary, that things would ease, that she was managing. She was not managing. She was surviving. There was a difference, and on the nights when she was honest with herself, she felt it in her bones. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Marin, probably. Her best friend had been texting since afternoon, worried because Nora had mentioned Eli seemed fussier than usual. She ignored it and went to warm the bottle she had prepared that morning. The microwave hummed. The apartment settled around her, the particular quiet of a place that held only one adult and one small child. And she stood at the counter and breathed, and did not let herself think about anything past the next 10 minutes. Eli started crying before the bottle was warm. Not fussy crying, not the low, rolling complaint of boredom or hunger. This was the sharp, escalating sound that meant something was genuinely wrong, and Nora was back across the apartment before she had consciously decided to move. She lifted him from the playpen and felt the heat radiating off his small body like a warning. Too hot. She pressed her lips to his forehead the way her mother used to do years ago, before the car accident that had made Nora an orphan at 24, and taught her that the people you depended on could disappear without any warning at all. Eli was burning. She carried him to the bathroom, found the infant thermometer in the cabinet above the sink, held it under his arm, while he whimpered against her shoulder. 103.2 degrees Fahrenheit. She had given him acetaminophen 2 hours ago. It should have brought the fever down by now. She called the pediatrician. Voicemail. Of course it was voicemail. It was past 6 on a Friday evening. and the world did not pause its schedule for single mothers in fourth-floor walk-ups with sick babies and no one to call. She Googled symptoms with one hand while holding Eli with the other, and every result seemed darker than the last. She closed the browser before she could read any further. Marin called again. This time Nora answered. Eli has a fever, 103 and climbing. I gave him acetaminophen 2 hours ago and it is not working. The pause on the other end lasted exactly 1 second. Take him to the ER, right now. Do not wait. Nora was already moving. She packed the diaper bag with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned to suppress panic by giving her hands something to do. Extra clothes. The stuffed rabbit with one ear Eli had chewed gray and damp. Her wallet, her insurance card, her keys. She dressed him in the warmest sleep suit she could find, strapped him into the carrier against her chest, and took the stairs down faster than was safe. Outside, Boston had turned vicious. The temperature had dropped since she had come home, and the sky opened up the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk. Cold October rain, heavy and immediate, soaking through her blouse before she had made it to the corner. She did not go back inside for a jacket. She ran. The drive to Boston General was 12 minutes on a clear night. She made it in 8, running 2 red lights and not caring about the consequences. There were no consequences that mattered more than the small, too quiet weight against her chest. Eli had stopped crying somewhere on the highway, and that silence was worse than any sound he could have made. She talked to him the whole way, kept her voice low and steady, told him they were almost there, told him he was going to be fine, told him she was right here. She was always right here. That was the one promise she knew how to keep. The emergency room entrance glowed harsh and white against the stormy dark. She ran through the automatic doors with rain still streaming down her face, and the woman at the triage desk took one look at Eli and called for assistance before Nora had finished her first sentence. Suddenly, there were people in scrubs asking questions she could barely track. Age, weight, medical history, allergies. When did the fever start? What medication and what dosage? Is the father present? Nora's answer was automatic. No, it is just me. They took Eli through a set of double doors she was not allowed to follow, and a woman in purple scrubs guided her to a small waiting room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting, and a motivational poster on the wall that she could not bring herself to read. Someone will be with you shortly. Try to stay calm. She sat down. Her wet clothes left dark patches on the plastic. She stared at the door Eli had disappeared through and breathed and waited. The doctor who came for her was young, tired-looking, with wire-rimmed glasses and a manner that was kind without being soft. He introduced himself as Dr. Sullivan. Eli was stable for now, he said, but the fever was concerning given his age and symptoms. They wanted to rule out bacterial meningitis. They would need to perform a lumbar puncture. Nora knew what that meant. She had read enough in those terrible minutes of frantic searching to know exactly what it meant. We need complete medical history, Dr. Sullivan said, particularly from the father's side. Blood type, genetic conditions, immune disorders, anything that could affect treatment. The room tilted slightly. She had been keeping this secret for 15 months. She had made her peace with it, or she had told herself she had made her peace with it, which was not the same thing but was close enough to function. Rowan Hale did not know he had a son. Rowan Hale had made it clear in the careful, final way he made everything clear that children were not something he could afford to have. Children are targets, he had told her once in the dark of their bedroom, when she had tried to talk about their future. Anyone who wants leverage over me will go through them first. She had heard rejection. She had packed that rejection into her chest like a stone, and carried it out of their marriage and up to Boston and into this life she had built from nothing. She had not considered until this moment that what he had meant was fear. Dr. Sullivan was waiting. "I can try to reach him," she heard herself say. "Please do," the doctor said. "Time matters here. Time matters." She sat alone in the waiting room with her phone in her hands. She did not have Rowan's number. She had deleted it the day she drove out of Manhattan, a gesture that had felt like power, and now felt like one more thing she had done without thinking far enough ahead. But she knew someone who would have it. Her divorce attorney, Margaret Solano, who was careful and meticulous and kept records of everything, including the contact information of the man who had once been her client's husband. Nora called her. Margaret answered on the fourth ring, cautious and surprised. Nora explained in as few words as possible. There was a pause, then another. "Then give me 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes were the longest Nora had spent since the night Eli was born, when she had labored alone in this same hospital, because she had not told anyone she was due, and had convinced herself she preferred it that way. She had held Eli for the first time in a room that smelled like antiseptic and clean linen, and she had looked at his face and understood that she had made an enormous decision on behalf of another person who had no say in it. She had told herself it was the right decision. She had been telling herself that for 7 months. The number arrived as a text, 11 digits she had once known by heart, that had once lit up her phone with the particular complicated feeling of being loved by someone who did not know how to show it. She stared at them for a full minute. Then she dialed. It rang 3 times. Then his voice, deeper than she remembered. Or maybe she had just spent 15 months trying to forget exactly how it sounded. "Who is this?" She had rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times over the past year, in the way you rehearse something you hope never to need. Every version of it had her calm and measured and in control. Every version dissolved the moment she heard him speak. "Rowan. It is Nora." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that has weight and temperature and a particular quality she recognized from their marriage. The silence of a man processing faster than he was speaking, calculating angles, running scenarios. "I have been wondering when you would call," he said. Something in that sentence stopped her. Not anger, not surprise. Wondering, as though he had been expecting this, as though he had been waiting. She did not have time to ask what he meant. "That does not matter right now. I need your medical history. Blood type, genetic conditions, anything relevant. I need it immediately." "Why would you need my medical history?" His voice had changed. Still controlled, but with something underneath it now. Something that was not quite worry and not quite recognition, but was moving toward both. "Because our son is in the hospital with a 103-degree fever, and they think it might be meningitis, and they need to know if there are any genetic factors before they do a spinal tap." She said it all in one breath. There was no other way to say it. The silence that came after was different from the first one. This one was absolute. The kind that exists in the second between a lightning strike and the sound of thunder when everything in the world seems to hold very still. "What did you just say?" "We have a son. His name is Eli. He is 7 months old, and he is sick. And I need your medical information right now, or they cannot treat him properly." She heard him breathe, once, controlled and sharp the way he had always breathed when something caught him completely off guard, which almost nothing ever did. 7 months. His voice had gone flat, not emotionless. flat in the way a surface goes flat when enormous pressure is being applied from underneath. You have had a child for 7 months, and you never told me. Rowan, I need your blood type. Where are you? Boston General Hospital. But do not come here. It is a 4-hour drive. And what I need is your medical information, not. I will be there in 90 minutes. Give the phone to the doctor. That is not possible. It is 4 hours from Manhattan. I said 90 minutes. Give the phone to the doctor. Dr. Sullivan had been standing in the doorway. She had not noticed him there. She handed him the phone with hands that were not entirely steady. She watched his face as he listened, watched his professional composure absorb whatever Rowan was saying, and then absorb something more, some quality of the voice or the information, or the specific character of the man on the other end of the line, that shifted something in the doctor's expression from clinical to careful. The call lasted 4 minutes. Dr. Sullivan handed the phone back. A B negative, he said. That is rare. Less than 1% of the population. Eli inherited it from his father. It affects treatment protocols and blood product availability if we need transfusions. His father was very thorough. He also mentioned he is bringing his own medical team. Nora looked at him. His own team. Dr. Sullivan's gaze was measured. Ms. Calloway. Who exactly is Eli's father? She opened her mouth, closed it. How did you explain Rowan Hale in a hospital corridor to a tired doctor who needed a simple answer? Successful businessman was true, but laughably incomplete. Dangerous man involved in things she had never fully understood was more accurate, but not something you said out loud in public. She settled on the version that was technically honest and strategically vague. He has resources, she said. He is well connected. Dr. Sullivan made a note on his tablet without comment. They moved Eli to a private room in the pediatric wing while preparations for the lumbar puncture were arranged, and Nora was allowed to sit with him for 5 minutes. He lay in the hospital crib looking impossibly small against the white sheets, surrounded by monitors and IV lines, wearing a tiny gown printed with cartoon animals that might have been cheerful in any other context. His cheeks were flushed with fever. His hair was damp. She reached through the crib bars and took his hand. His fingers curled around hers, even in sleep, that instinctive grip that babies have, that particular small strength that had undone her completely, the first time she felt it. I am sorry, she said quietly. I should have been braver. But you are going to be okay. Your father is coming, and he is going to make sure you have everything you need. She did not examine the feeling that came with saying it. She did not have the bandwidth for that yet. A nurse came to take Eli for the procedure. Nora kissed his forehead, breathed in the milk and soap smell of him, and let them wheel him away. She went back to the waiting room. She sat down. She stared at the motivational poster she still had not read and listened to the storm outside rattle the windows. Rowan Hale was coming. The man she had loved with a kind of desperate, consuming certainty that had frightened her, even at its best. The man who had shut her out of every real corner of his life while expecting her to stand beside him at every public one. The man who had looked at her across a courtroom while their lawyers finalized the paperwork that ended their marriage and had said nothing, and had looked away first. She had spent 15 months rebuilding herself from the specific wreckage of loving him. She had moved to a new city, taken a harder job, learned to function alone, learned to find some version of satisfaction in the life she was constructing without him. She had convinced herself she was past the worst of it. She was not past the worst of it. She was sitting in a hospital waiting room in wet clothes at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, and in approximately 90 minutes, Rowan Hale was going to walk through those doors, and she did not know what happened after that. She only knew that the story she had been telling herself for 15 months, the one where she had made the right choice and survived it and was fine, was about to be tested in a way she could not prepare for. She heard the helicopter before she saw anything, a low, heavy thrum cutting through the sound of the storm descending somewhere nearby. Then, raised voices at the emergency room entrance. The particular quality of a disturbance that came from someone refusing to accept the rules of a space they had decided did not apply to them. She stood up. Rowan Hale came through the emergency room like a man who had never once in his life needed to ask permission for anything. Black suit, perfectly cut, dark hair, slightly damp from the rain, pushed back from his face in a way that made him look exactly like himself, which was somehow the worst part. Behind him came 3 other men moving with the same controlled efficiency she remembered from the security team he had kept during their marriage. His eyes found hers across the room before she had taken 3 steps. She had forgotten the specific quality of that. The way his gaze had always located her first in any room before anyone else. He crossed the distance between them in seconds. He was taller than memory had allowed him to be. Or maybe memory had been protecting her by making him smaller. "Where is he? They are doing the lumbar puncture. We have to wait." "I am not waiting. Rowan, they have protocols. You cannot just walk into a pediatric procedure." His jaw tightened. "That is my son." He said it quietly, not as a performance, as a statement of fact. That was also, she realized, the first time he had said it out loud, and the weight of it seemed to land on him as he spoke it, like something he had been bracing for and had not fully anticipated the reality of. They stood in the corridor outside the pediatric wing and waited. One of his men, the one carrying the medical bag, was taken by a nurse to speak with Dr. Sullivan. The other 2 positioned themselves near the entrance with the unobtrusive competence of people trained to be invisible while being completely present. Nora stared at the double doors at the end of the hallway. Rowan stood beside her close enough that she could feel the tension radiating off him. That particular coiled stillness she had once interpreted as calm, and had eventually learned was the opposite of calm. "You said you had been wondering when I would call," she said without looking at him. He said nothing for a moment. "I knew you were in Boston," he said finally. "I have known for 8 months." She turned to look at him then. "You knew. I had people keeping an eye on you. After the divorce," he kept his voice level, "not watching you, making sure you were safe. I never interfered. I just needed to know you were all right." She absorbed that without responding. There would be time later to decide what it meant, what it cost her, whether it was something she could accept or something she needed to push back against. Right now, she had one question that mattered more than the rest. "You knew I was pregnant." The words came out quiet and carried everything. He was silent for 3 full seconds. "Yes." "When?" He looked at the double doors. 6 weeks before you left. I saw you coming out of the clinic near our apartment. You had the look. I recognized it. I waited for you to tell me. Why did you not just ask?" "Because the answer would have changed everything. And I was not sure yet which way." She thought about that. The specific cruelty of it and the specific logic of it, and the way those 2 things were not mutually exclusive with Rowan Hale. She had spent 15 months constructing a version of events in which she had made a unilateral choice about a situation he was unaware of. That architecture was dismantled in this corridor in 6 sentences, and she did not yet know what to build in its place. "Why did you not come after me?" "Because you had made a choice." He finally looked at her. "And I had spent our entire marriage making choices for both of us without asking what you want. That was the one I decided not to make for you." Dr. Sullivan appeared at the end of the hallway before she could respond. He looked between them with the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned not to editorialize about the lives of the people passing through his care. "The procedure went well," he said. "Eli is resting. You can see him now. Both of you." They followed him through the maze of hallways without speaking. When they reached the room, Rowan stopped in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment before he moved. Nora watched him look at his son for the first time with full knowledge of what he was looking at. And she watched something happen in his expression that she had no word for. Something that moved through the controlled surface of him, like a fault line shifting deep underground. Eli had Rowan's dark hair, his nose, the particular set of his mouth. Looking at them together left no room for ambiguity. No space for the comfortable uncertainties she had been living inside. Rowan moved forward slowly. He stood beside the crib. One hand gripped the rail. His knuckles went white. He did not say anything for a long time. Then, very quietly, in a voice she had never heard from him before, he said hello to his son. The baby was asleep, flushed and small IV line taped to the back of one tiny hand. He did not respond. But something in the room changed anyway, some quality of the air, some irreversible shift in the arrangement of things. "I am your father," Rowan said, "and I am not going anywhere." Nora stood in the doorway and watched the man she had left holding the railing of their son's hospital crib. And she thought about choices and their consequences and the particular way that doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing could look identical from certain distances, and she did not know yet which one she had done. She only knew there was no going back to the life she had been living 48 hours ago. That version of things was over. Eli's fever broke in the early hours of the morning, dropping steadily through the night, while Rowan sat in the chair beside the crib and did not sleep and did not leave. Dr. Sullivan said the cultures were looking better. Nora sat on the other side of her son's bed and watched the man she had divorced hold their child's hand and breathe with the focused, deliberate steadiness of someone who was afraid and refusing to show it. She recognized that. She had been doing it for 15 months. 3 weeks they stayed in that hospital. 3 weeks of antibiotics and monitoring and quiet negotiations conducted in low voices over their son's crib, while the October rain turned to November chill outside the windows. The cultures confirmed bacterial meningitis caught early, treated aggressively, resolved without lasting damage. Eli recovered the way babies recover, stubbornly and completely, as though illness were an inconvenience he had decided not to accommodate. Rowan did not go back to New York. He took a suite at a hotel 4 blocks from the hospital and appeared every morning before 7. Always with 2 cups of coffee. Always in a different suit that somehow always looked identical to the one before it. He learned Eli's schedule within 4 days. He sat with the infant specialists his team had flown in. He asked questions that revealed he had been paying close attention to everything. In the second week, she watched him learn to hold Eli properly. Not the stiff, uncertain handling of a man unfamiliar with infants, but a deliberate process of adjustment, of learning the specific weight and warmth of this particular child. He held Eli against his chest one afternoon while Nora spoke with the nursing staff, and she turned to find them both still, Eli's dark eyes open and fixed on his father's face with the searching, absolute attention that babies give to things they are trying to understand. Rowan looked back at him with an expression she had no category for, something between wonder and reckoning. "He is trying to figure out if he knows me," Rowan said quietly when she came to stand beside him. "What do you think?" He looked at Eli. "I think he is deciding." She watched them and understood something she had been avoiding for 7 months. She had told herself she was protecting Eli by keeping him from Rowan's world. She had not considered that she was also keeping Rowan from the thing that might have changed him. Whether it would have changed him sooner, she could not know. But watching him now, she understood that the change was happening, and it was real, and she had no framework for what that meant yet. By the end of the second week, Nora understood that whatever arrangement she had constructed in Boston, whatever story she had been living inside the one where she was managing, and Eli was safe and distance was protection, none of it was going to survive the reality of Rowan Hale knowing his son existed. The question was not whether things would change. The question was how and in what direction, and who would have a say in determining it. She was beginning to suspect she was going to have to fight very hard to ensure the answer to that last part included her. On the morning of Eli's discharge, Rowan set a folder on the waiting room table between them. It contained legal documents, a lease agreement for an apartment on the Upper East Side, a contract for corporate legal consulting services, and a salary figure that made her jaw tighten because it was exactly what she was worth. And she had not been paid anything close to it in 15 months. He did not say, "Come back." He did not say he was sorry. Those were not phrases that lived comfortably in Rowan Hale's vocabulary. What he said was, "Come home." And then he waited. She looked at the documents. She looked at Eli in her arms, healthy now, his dark eyes bright and focused on her face with complete trust. She looked at the number on the consulting contract. She looked at the rain on the hospital windows and thought about her apartment and the broken elevator and the bills on the kitchen counter. Then she looked at Rowan. "I have conditions," she said. He nodded once. "Name them." She named them. He agreed to each one without negotiating, which was not something she had anticipated, and which was, she would understand later, its own kind of message. Joint legal decision-making on everything concerning Eli. Her work remained fully independent, no crossover with anything she had reason to question. The right to leave, always without obstruction. He agreed to all of it, steadily, without flinching. She signed the papers. That night in the apartment, she would leave in 3 days. She sat on the floor with Eli in her lap and called a number she had found through a contact at the firm. A number she had been carrying in the back of her mind since she had started asking questions about the cartel activity she had read about in connection with Rowan's name. The man who answered identified himself as Agent Brett Callahan, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Organized Crime Division. "Nora Calloway," she said. "I think I might be able to help you." She did not let herself think too hard about what she was doing. She had a son to protect, and she had learned in the past 3 weeks that protection required more angles than she had been working with. She was going to need every single one of them. The house was different when she left it. That was the thought she held in the back seat of the car, moving south through the November dark. Eli asleep in his seat beside her. The highway lights strobing past in long, even intervals. The apartment in Boston was already becoming memory, already flattening into a series of images, rather than a life. The broken elevator, the rent envelope, the particular cold of a space that held only her and her son, and the specific weight of a secret she had convinced herself was protection. She had made 2 promises that night. The first was to Eli, whispered into his hair while he slept, that she would never stop fighting for him, no matter what shape that fight took. The second was to herself, that she would not go back to being the woman she had been during her marriage. Passive, patient, waiting for Rowan Hale to decide how much of himself to share and in what measure. Both promises were going to be harder to keep than she had anticipated. She understood that already. She understood it, and she made them anyway because the alternative was going into this without any anchor at all. The apartment Rowan had arranged was on the 14th floor of a building on East 73rd Street. with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the bare November trees of Central Park. 3 bedrooms, marble countertops, furniture so carefully selected it looked like no one had ever touched it. The refrigerator had been stocked before they arrived. The nursery had been fully assembled, including a mobile above the crib that played a soft looping melody she did not recognize. She stood in the middle of the living room the first evening with Eli on her hip and understood that Rowan had been planning this for longer than 3 weeks. You did not stock a refrigerator and assemble a nursery mobile in the time it took to discharge an infant from a Boston hospital. This had been prepared, waiting. She added it to the growing list of things about Rowan Hale that she was learning to read differently than she once had. She started the new job on a Monday, corporate legal consulting for Hale Trade Group, the largest of Rowan's legitimate import businesses. The work itself was exactly what she had been told it would be: real complex. The kind of compliance and contract review that required genuine expertise and rewarded careful attention. She worked from a home office Rowan had equipped with everything she needed, reviewed documents in the mornings, while a carefully vetted nanny named Patricia looked after Eli, and built a professional rhythm she could be proud of, independent of any other consideration. She was also quietly and methodically learning to read the edges of his world, not the center of it. She was careful about that. But the edges, the way certain calls came in after midnight. And Rowan's voice changed when he took them, dropping half a register, losing whatever surface warmth he had been wearing. The way Dex, his second, communicated in shorthand, she was beginning to understand. Territorial, delivery, arrangement. Words that meant something in a corporate context and something else entirely in Rowan's. She called Callahan every Tuesday from a prepaid phone she had purchased with cash from a drugstore in the East Village. She told him what she had observed. She was careful. She gave him nothing that would expose Rowan's legitimate operations. Nothing that came from documents she had reviewed in her professional capacity. What she gave him was peripheral, patterns, schedules, the names of men she heard mentioned in passing who did not appear on any organizational chart. She understood what she was doing, and she did not pretend otherwise to herself. She was building a wall around Eli from the outside, using tools Rowan could not control, ensuring that no matter what happened inside this world, she had stepped back into. There was a federal apparatus working to dismantle the thing that most threatened her son. That was the truth of it. She held on to that truth on the Tuesday mornings when guilt made the phone feel heavier than it was. By the 3rd week of November, she had learned to recognize the difference between Rowan's security and someone else's surveillance. His men wore dark wool coats and moved with a specific contained efficiency. They were always positioned at exit points, always facing outward. She had cataloged their rotations within the first week. They were predictable in the way that well-trained security is predictable, because predictability in a known environment is not a liability. The others were different. She noticed the first one on a Tuesday afternoon when she took Eli to the small playground 2 blocks east of the building. A man in a dark jacket sitting on a bench across the street, not reading the newspaper in his lap. His eyes moved at the wrong intervals. He was watching the building entrance, not the street. She had seen enough of Rowan's world in the past weeks to know that was not the same thing. She mentioned it that evening when Rowan came by at his usual time, 6:00, for the hours he spent with Eli before disappearing back into whatever occupied his nights. Eli was working on standing, gripping the edge of the coffee table with both fists, legs trembling with effort, face arranged in the expression of someone who has decided that succeeding at this particular task is the most important thing in the world. Rowan was crouched beside him, one hand hovering at his waist, ready to catch without interfering. There was a man at the playground today, Nora said. Not one of yours. Rowan's attention shifted. His expression did not change. Describe him. She did. Dark jacket, wrong eye movement, positioned to watch the building rather than the street. She had noted the bench, the angle, the approximate time. She had always been good at the details that other people let slide past them. It was what made her effective at her work. It was also she was beginning to understand what made her useful in the current situation, in ways she had not fully mapped yet. Rowan said nothing for a moment. He helped Eli settle back down when the boy's legs gave out, which they did with a thump and an expression of profound indignation. Then he stood and pulled out his phone. Starting tomorrow, he said, you do not take Eli to that playground. There is a private garden on the roof of this building. He can use that until further notice. Rowan, what is happening? He looked at her with that particular calculation moving behind his eyes. The one she had spent 2 years of marriage trying to read and never quite managing to decipher. The organization that has been pushing into New England? He said. They have been watching me for a long time. When I mobilized to get to Boston, when I chartered the helicopter and moved a medical team across state lines, I made myself visible in a way I had not been in years. They investigated. They traced back to you. To Eli. The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. They know about him. They know. Why have a son? Rowan's jaw tightened. Before I was an obstacle to their expansion. Now I am a man with something they can exploit. It changes everything about how they calculate their options. So what do? We move. Tomorrow. My primary residence in Westchester. 40 acres, complete security people I have personally vetted over years. It is the most defensible location I control. She looked around the apartment she had been living in for 3 weeks. The one she had been telling herself represented a kind of independence and understood that the geometry of her situation had shifted again in the night without asking her permission. You want me to live with you. I want my son protected. You are part of that equation. She noticed the order in which he put those two things. She chose not to comment on it. Not yet. The Westchester property appeared as they turned off the main road. The gate sliding open before their vehicle had fully stopped security so seamlessly embedded in the landscape that you only perceived it if you were trained to look. The main house was stone and glass, and modern proportion nothing like the Manhattan apartment she had shared with him during their marriage. That place had been a performance curated and public-facing. This was something else entirely, older in some quality that had nothing to do with when it was built. A place that had been designed for permanence. Rowan was waiting on the front steps. He opened the car door himself, lifted Eli from his seat with the ease of a man who had spent the past 3 weeks learning exactly how, and said simply, "Welcome home." She did not answer that, but she noticed as she crossed the threshold, the painting hanging on the wall to the left of the entrance. The one they had bought together at a small auction in Tribeca, during a rare afternoon off during their marriage, the only time she could remember them choosing something together without an agenda. She had never seen it in the Manhattan apartment. He had kept it somewhere she was never shown, in the private geography of a life he had never allowed her to fully enter. She walked past it without speaking, and carried that detail with her into the new life she was beginning. The work continued. The Tuesday calls to Callahan continued. He was patient, methodical, building something she could not fully see the shape of from the inside. He wanted more than she was giving him. She could tell from the quality of his silences when she finished speaking. The pauses of a man calculating what to request next, without pushing hard enough to lose what he had. She understood the dynamic without needing it explained. In late November, during one of her Tuesday calls, She told Callahan about a name she had heard Rowan and Dex use 3 times in the past week. Griffin Farrell. Always at the edges of conversations she was not meant to be part of, always connected to words like territory and arrangement, and the phrase, the Eastern Corridor. Callahan went quiet in a different way than usual. Sharper. The silence of a man who has just been handed something he has been waiting for. "How did you come across that name?" he asked. "Careful listening," she said. "Same as everything else." He told her to keep listening. He told her to be careful. He did not tell her what he already knew about Griffin Farrell, which she understood was deliberate because information was a currency, and Callahan spent it precisely. She was careful. She was also thorough. In the first week of December, reviewing a compliance report for one of the legitimate import companies, she found a discrepancy in a shipping manifest that had no good explanation under normal commercial logic. She cross-referenced it with 2 other documents. The pattern was there if you knew what you were looking for. She did not include it in her Tuesday call. She sat with it for 3 days, turning it over, understanding that the line between what she was doing and something more serious was measured in choices she made in quiet rooms when no one was watching. She did not give Callahan the shipping documents. She flagged the discrepancy internally, reported it through legitimate channels as a compliance issue, and watched it disappear into whatever process Dex used to make such things disappear. She noted that it disappeared. She filed that observation in the part of her mind where she kept the things she was not yet sure what to do with. December arrived with the particular cold clarity of a Hudson Valley winter. Eli was 9 months old now, healthy and demanding and furiously determined to walk. He had moved past pulling himself upright and was now lurching between pieces of furniture, each step a negotiation between momentum and balance. He had Rowan's persistence and Nora's refusal to accept an outcome she did not choose, and the combination produced a child who fell constantly and got up every single time, with the expression of someone who considers gravity a personal affront. Rowan had begun spending more evenings at the house, not all of them. His nights were still accounted for by things Nora did not ask about, and he did not explain, but more of them. He would arrive in time for Eli's bath and stay through the bedtime routine. And sometimes after Eli was asleep, he and Nora would sit in the kitchen or the library and talk about things that had nothing to do with the cartel or the FBI or the particular complicated war they were each quietly conducting. She learned things about him in those hours that she had not known during 2 years of marriage. That his father had died when Rowan was 17 in circumstances he described with a brevity that communicated more than elaboration would have. That the business had not been inherited but constructed piece by piece from a position of having nothing and owing nothing and trusting no one, because those were the conditions his particular starting point had imposed. That he had a younger brother in Portland who coached his son's Little League team and had a mortgage and did not know what Rowan did, and that Rowan sent money to an account the brother could never trace back to him, and never would. She told him things too, about her parents and the accident and the specific texture of learning to be an adult without anyone to call when things went wrong, about law school and the particular weight of building a career entirely on effort, with no connections and no safety net, about Boston and what it had cost her, and what she had found there, that she had not expected to find a version of herself that was more capable than she had known. These were conversations they had never had during their marriage. She understood sitting in the kitchen at 11 at night, with the security cameras blinking their steady rhythm at the corners of the property, that the marriage they had failed at had been conducted almost entirely in the dark. 2 people sharing a physical space and a legal arrangement, and almost nothing else that was real. What was happening now was something neither of them had been capable of before. Whether it had required everything that had happened between then and now to become possible, she did not know. She suspected it had. The nightmares started in the second week of December. Always the same. Men she could not see clearly taking Eli from his crib while she stood at the doorway unable to move or make a sound. She would wake gasping, drenched, and spend the next hour watching the nursery monitor with the focused, joyless attention of a person who cannot afford to sleep. Rowan found her in the hallway outside Eli's room at 3 in the morning on a Thursday, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and the baby monitor in her lap. He did not say anything at first. He sat down on the floor beside her, which was not something she had ever seen him do, and looked at the closed nursery door. The hallway was dim-lit only by the faint glow of the nightlight inside Eli's room, coming through the crack under the door. They sat in that dim light and said nothing for a moment. "Same dream?" he asked finally. She had mentioned the nightmares once briefly, in a way that was meant to close the subject. He had not closed the subject internally. "They feel real," she said. "I can hear him and I cannot get to him." He was quiet. "Then I have had something similar for 20 years. Different content. The same paralysis. You learn to recognize it for what it is. What is it?" He looked at the nursery door. The cost of caring about something enough that the thought of losing it becomes unbearable. They sat on the floor of the hallway in the dark for a while without talking. It was the most unguarded thing they had ever done together. Two people sitting with their fear in the middle of the night, not performing steadiness for anyone, not managing the impression they were making. After a while, he said, "I should have told you this during our marriage. All of it. The fear underneath the control." She thought about that. "Yes," she said. "You should have. I was trying to protect you from it. You were managing what I was allowed to know. There is a difference." He did not argue with that. She noticed it. She appreciated it more than she expected to. She started to say something then. The words were there, the explanation she owed him about Callahan and the Tuesday calls, and the 6 weeks of careful, deliberate information she had been providing. She had been building toward telling him. She could feel the weight of it pressing against the conversation, the way undisclosed things press against the moments most likely to contain them. But what came out instead was the other question. The one underneath the practical one. "During our marriage," she said, "why did you never let me all the way in?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because every real thing I showed you was something someone could eventually use," he said. "My father taught me that lesson before I was old enough to understand why he was teaching it. By the time I understood, it was the only way I knew how to operate." He paused. "I had already lost people I cared about to that exact mechanism, showing them the truth of my life and watching it become the thing that destroyed them. So you kept me in a version of your life that was safe for me to occupy. I kept you in the part I could afford to lose." He looked at her. "Which meant I lost you anyway when you understood that was all you were getting. And then Eli got sick. And then Eli got sick." His voice was steady. "And I understood that there is no version of safe that does not include being present. Distance is not protection. It is just absence given a different name." Eli made a small sound through the monitor. Both of them looked at it. The sound subsided back into the steady rhythm of an infant sleeping. She did not tell him about Callahan that night. She told herself there would be another opportunity, a better moment, a framing that would make the truth land in the right way. She told herself things that were true enough to function on, and went back to bed and slept for 4 hours without the nightmare returning. In the morning, Rowan brought coffee to her office without being asked, set it on the corner of her desk, and left without a word. She watched the door close behind him, and sat with the weight of what she had not said. The second week of December brought a development she had not anticipated. Dex came to find her in the library on a Wednesday afternoon, which he had never done before. He stood in the doorway with an expression that communicated something specific, without being readable, and told her that Rowan wanted to see her in the study when she had a moment. Rowan was at the window when she arrived. The particular set of his shoulders told her something had shifted. "We have confirmed what we suspected," he said, without turning around. "Farrell's people have been running surveillance on this property for 2 weeks. They have confirmed Eli's existence, his age, his daily patterns." She kept her voice level. "What does that mean?" He turned. "It means the meeting I have been arranging is more urgent than I anticipated. Neutral ground, Newark. 2 weeks. We negotiate a boundary. They get a corridor into New England that does not overlap with my operations. In exchange, they pull their people back and we establish terms. And if they do not honor the terms, then we are in a different kind of conversation." His jaw tightened. "But that is not the likely outcome. These arrangements work when both parties understand the cost of the alternative." She stood in the study with the winter light flat and gray through the window, and understood that he was telling her this because the meeting was real and the risk was real, and Rowan Hale, whatever else was true of him, had decided she deserved to know the actual shape of the situation she was living inside. "There is something else," he said. "If this meeting does not go the way it should, if something happens." He crossed to the desk, opened a drawer, set a folder on the surface between them. "Full legal custody to you, no contest. Financial provision. Instructions for my organization about your protection, and Eli's for as long as you want it." She looked at the folder. "Rowan, I am not being morbid. I am being practical." He met her eyes. "You should never again be in the position you were in Boston. That is a thing I can control. I am controlling it." "The position I was in Boston," she said, "was one I chose. I know. And it cost you things it should not have cost you." He paused. "I cannot undo that. But I can make sure that the architecture going forward does not depend on my continued presence to hold together." She thought, standing there, about what it meant that this was how he said he was afraid. Not in words, in documentation, in the transfer of security from his hands to systems that would outlast him. That night, after he had gone, she sat in the library for a long time. She thought about all of it. The painting in the hallway he had kept in a place she never found during their marriage. The documents on the desk. The way he had said her name in the hospital corridor in Boston with the particular weight of a man who had spent 15 months being careful not to say it. She thought about what it meant to love someone you did not entirely trust, and whether trust was something that could be rebuilt from the kind of damage they had both sustained, and whether she was making the same mistake she had made before, or something different enough to have a different outcome. She picked up the prepaid phone. Callahan answered on the second ring. "The meeting," she said. "Newark Industrial District, Route 1, the old warehouse complex at the eastern end. 2 weeks from Saturday. That is everything I have." The quality of his silence told her it was enough. "Thank you," he said. "Stay home that day, Nora. Whatever happens, stay home." She disconnected, sat in the dark, listened to the property around her. The heating system, the wind against the stone, the faint sound of the guards changing shift at the gate. Somewhere above her, Eli was asleep, healthy and whole and entirely unaware of the specific geometry of the situation his parents had constructed around him. She went upstairs and checked on him and stood in the doorway of the nursery for a long time, watching his chest rise and fall in the blue glow of the monitor. She had done the thing she had done. She could not undo it. She could only move forward from it with as much clarity as she could maintain. 2 weeks, she thought. She would deal with everything else after that. The morning of the Newark meeting arrived without ceremony. She woke before dawn and lay in the dark and did not move for a long time. She had made her choices and confirmed them in the night, and there was nothing left to second guess. The only thing left was the waiting. Rowan came to the doorway of her room before he left. He did not come in. He stood in the frame in his dark coat, and they looked at each other across the dim room, and she thought about everything she had not yet said, and understood that some of it would have to wait. "Come back," she said. "That is the plan," he said. Then he was gone, and the house held its breath around her, and she got up and began the work of getting through the day. She fed Eli his breakfast. Nearly 10 months old now, closer to 10 than 9, he approached solid food with the focused enthusiasm of someone who has recently discovered that the world contains more textures than previously suspected. She talked to him while he ate, narrating the morning in the low, steady voice that seemed to settle him. She changed him. She put him down for his morning nap. She sat at the desk in her office and stared at a contract and retained nothing. At 11, she put the contract away. At noon, she made herself eat something. At 2:17, her phone rang. A number she did not recognize. She answered before the second ring had finished. It was Dex. His voice carried the particular compression of a man keeping himself controlled by significant effort. "There was an incident," he said. "The meeting went sideways. Mr. Hale is alive and stable. Gunshot wound to the left shoulder. We are bringing him back now. He needs medical attention on arrival." She was already moving before he finished the sentence. She called Dr. Alderman, who had an arrangement with the household, and arrived without questions. She cleared the dining room table. She located the medical supplies she had cataloged in the first week at the property, not because she had expected to need them, but because she was the kind of person who cataloged such things. She asked one of the guards to take Eli upstairs with Patricia and keep him there, and she stood in the entrance hall with her hands steady at her sides and waited. The vehicles came up the drive fast and controlled. Dex was first through the door, then 2 more men, and between them Rowan walking under his own power. The left side of his coat was dark and soaked through. He saw her immediately. Whatever he had been holding himself together with shifted slightly when he did. Something in the set of his jaw changed. She said nothing. She took his right arm and guided him to the room she had prepared. And Dr. Alderman was already there. And she stepped back and let the doctor work and stood against the wall and kept her breathing even, and did not let herself process what she was looking at until she knew he was going to be all right. It took 40 minutes. The bullet had passed through cleanly. No critical damage. Dr. Alderman spoke to her in the hallway afterward with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to these conversations, told her what to watch for, when to call, what the next days would require. She retained all of it. Later, after the house had quieted, and Eli had been settled for the night, and Dex had posted additional people at every entrance, she sat in the chair beside Rowan's bed and watched him sleep. He looked different in sleep, less constructed. The vigilance that organized his waking face was absent, and what remained underneath it was something she recognized from the very beginning of their marriage, before she had understood what she had married into. She had loved him then without knowing him. She was beginning to know him now. The distance between those two things was significant. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the chair and thought about what she needed to tell him, and when and what it would cost, and she decided somewhere around 4 in the morning that there was only one way to do it. Completely. Without softening the parts that did not soften. In the morning, he was awake when she came in with coffee, propped against the headboard, pale and clearly in pain, and engaged in the ongoing project of refusing to acknowledge either. She set the coffee on the nightstand and sat in the chair and looked at him. The FBI moved in simultaneously, he said. Multiple locations. 7 of Farrell's senior people arrested in coordinated raids across 3 states. She kept her expression neutral. The timing was precise. He looked at her steadily. The kind of precise that requires specific, accurate, actionable information provided in advance. She said nothing. "Callahan," he said, "tell me." So she told him. All of it. From the prepaid phone she bought in the East Village in early November to the last call she had made 2 weeks ago in the library in the dark. She told him what she had given Callahan and what she had refused to give. She told him she had never provided anything about his legitimate operations, never used information from the documents she reviewed professionally, never crossed the line she had drawn for herself between the cartel and the man she was living with. She told him she had given Callahan the location of the Newark meeting. She told him she had known exactly what she was doing, that there had been no moment of confusion about it, that she had made the choice with full understanding of its nature, and had made it anyway. Then she stopped and waited. Rowan did not speak for a long time. The room was very quiet. Outside, the December sky sat low and gray over the property. She watched his face and did not look away from it. She had spent 2 years learning to read him, and 2 months relearning everything, and she still could not entirely predict what lived inside his silences. She watched and waited, and did not fill the space. "I know," he said finally. 2 words. "I have known for 2 weeks. Dex identified your contact in the 3rd week of November. I had Callahan confirmed within 48 hours. I knew what you were doing and approximately what you were providing, and I made a decision not to address it." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because I needed to understand something first." He met her eyes. "I needed to know if you trusted me enough to tell me yourself, or whether what you were doing meant you were building a permanent exit from the inside. Something you intended to keep regardless of what happened between us." She processed that. "And which did you conclude I had not concluded either?" he said. "Not until this morning." She said, "I was going to tell you. I started to tell you in the hallway, the night with the nightmares." "I know. You stopped. I was afraid you would ask me to choose, and I did not know yet what I would choose." He was quiet. "I chose you," she said. "I chose Eli. That is what the call to Callahan was. It was not a betrayal of you. It was the only lever I had that you could not control. And I used it to try to keep you alive, because I was not willing to lose you to something I could have prevented. I understand that. Do you?" "Yes." Something in his voice shifted. Something that cost him to produce. "I understand it because it is exactly what I would have done. Use every available resource. Work every angle. Not because rules do not apply, but because some things matter more than the rules." He looked at her. "You used the tools you had to protect our son and his father." He paused. "I am furious about the method. I understand the reason. Both of those things are true at the same time." She exhaled slowly. "What happens now?" she said. "Now I decide whether I am capable of operating in a world where the person closest to me has independent relationships with federal law enforcement that I do not control. You do not get to control it. That was one of my conditions." He almost smiled. "That is what I am deciding. Whether I can genuinely accept a condition I agreed to before I understood what accepting it would actually require." She waited. "I think I can't," he said. I think I have to if I want what I think I want. What do you think you want? He looked at her for a long moment. What I should have wanted the first time, he said. A partner, not a person I managed. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic. Quiet and irrevocable the way a tide moves without announcing itself. I am not going to stop being my own person inside this life, she said. I know. I am not going to stop having access to options you do not control. I know that too. He paused. I am asking you not to use those options against me without telling me first. That is the thing I am asking for. She thought about it. It was a reasonable request. It was the kind of request that required trust running in both directions. Agreed, she said. He nodded once, then closed his eyes. She could see the effort it took him to hold himself still against the pain he was not going to acknowledge. You should sleep, she said. I have been sleeping for 12 hours. You have been unconscious for 12 hours. That is not the same thing. He opened his eyes. Stay, he said. The word carried the particular weight of a man who does not ask for things, easily saying the thing he needs. She moved the chair closer to the bed and stayed. Eli came in mid-morning with Patricia pulled himself upright against the bed frame with both fists and stood there trembling with the effort and the pride of it, looking at his father with an expression of pure announcement. Rowan reached down with his good arm and placed one steady hand at the boy's waist. Good man, he said quietly. I see you. Eli's face broke into the wide, unself-conscious smile of a child who has been completely seen. Nora watched them from the chair and felt something settle in her that had been unsettled for a very long time. 3 days later, Maren Cole flew in from Boston. Nora had told her everything the week before, not a managed version of it, not the edited account she had been offering in pieces over the past 2 months, but the full shape of the situation. The cartel, the FBI, Callahan, the choice she had made in the library in the dark, and what it had cost and what it had accomplished. Maren had listened without interrupting, which took visible effort, and when Nora was finished, she had said, I am coming down. Nora had not argued. Maren arrived on a Wednesday 3 days after the shooting, 2 days after Rowan had moved from the bedroom back to his study against Dr. Alderman's specific recommendation. She came with a bag she dropped in the guest room, and an expression that communicated she was conducting a comprehensive assessment of the situation and reserving judgment until she had sufficient information. She got her information at dinner. The 4 of them, Nora and Maren and Rowan and Eli, at the kitchen table. Eli in his high chair between his parents, working through cut pieces of soft pear with the focused concentration of someone engaged in meaningful labor. The ordinary chaos of it, the mess and the noise, and the small person demanding attention from multiple directions at once seemed to occupy Maren's attention in a way she had not expected. She watched Rowan with Eli, the way she watched sources she was not sure she had read correctly yet. He noticed. He answered her questions directly and without deflection. He asked about her work, beat her opinions on things she had not expected him to have read. He did not perform generosity. He simply engaged with the friend of the woman he loved, as though the outcome of that engagement mattered to him. Because it did. Nora could see that clearly. It was one of the things that had changed. At one point, while Nora was getting Eli a second helping, she heard Maren ask Rowan a question she had not been expecting. Direct and unhedged in the way Maren asked things when she had decided that hedging would produce a less accurate result. She asked him what he thought he was doing. Not an accusation. A genuine question. She wanted to know what his actual understanding was of the thing he was building here inside these walls, with this woman and this child. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am trying to become someone worth the risk she took in coming back." Marin said nothing to that. She nodded once slowly, the way she nodded when a source had said something that confirmed a thing she had already concluded. After dinner, while Rowan took Eli upstairs for his bath, Marin stood at the kitchen counter and looked at Nora with the expression she had been building toward all evening. On the way through the entrance hall, she had stopped in front of the painting, the one from Tribeca. She had looked at it for a moment and then looked at Nora with a question in her face. "He kept it," Nora said, "the whole time. I never saw it when we were married." Marin looked at the painting for another moment. Then she turned and walked into the kitchen without comment. That was enough. For Marin, that was the whole answer. "He is not what I expected," she said now at the counter. Nora said, "I know. That does not make him less dangerous. I know that too." Marin looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that contains years of friendship and honest conversation, and the accumulated weight of watching someone you love navigate things you cannot navigate for them. "You are really doing this," she said. Not a question. "Yes." Marin said, "Okay, just that." "Okay." Which from Marin was not simple acceptance. It was recognition. The particular recognition of someone who sees that a person they love has made a choice with full awareness of its cost and has decided the cost is worth paying. You do not argue with that kind of choice. You stand beside it. They cleaned up the kitchen together and talked about easier things, and Nora felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for longer than she could precisely identify. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in January with snow coming down past the study windows, Nora and Rowan stood in the main room of the Westchester house and said vows that were not what they had said the first time. The first time there had been 200 people in a hotel ballroom in Manhattan, a planner with opinions about centerpieces language chosen for its traditional weight rather than its accuracy. The performance of certainty for an audience. This time, Marin was the only witness. Eli was in Patricia's arms at the back of the room, waving at the general air with the democratic enthusiasm of a child who finds all situations equally interesting. Nora had written what she wanted to say. She said it without looking away from him. It was not romantic in the way that word is usually meant. It was honest, which she had decided was better. It was about choosing someone not because they are easy, but because they are real. About the difference between the comfortable version of a life and the true one, and why the difference is worth every difficult thing it costs to find. Rowan had not prepared anything. She had not expected him to. He stood in front of her in his dark suit, his arm no longer in the sling but still carried with slight care. And he looked at her the way he had looked at Eli that first night in the hospital, with the expression of a man confronting something he had not believed he was capable of having. And he said, "I failed you the first time by believing that keeping you safe and keeping you close were two different things. I understand now that they are the same. I am asking you to let me spend whatever time I have left proving that I know the difference." Marin, to her credit, did not cry. She was a journalist. She pressed her lips together once briefly and looked at a point above the window and then looked back at them with her expression composed. Eli announced something urgent and entirely incomprehensible from the back of the room. Everyone agreed with him. Callahan called the following week. The federal cases were being prepared for trial. Multiple defendants. The kind of prosecution that had been built over years and was now reaching the public stage. Griffin Farrell himself had been extradited from a private airfield in New Jersey 3 days after the Newark raids. A detail Callahan mentioned with the same tone he used for everything that was finished. Nora did not ask for the details of that. She did not need them. Callahan wanted to know if she would testify when the time came. She thought about it. That evening, she asked Rowan. He said, "Testify. Every year Farrell's people spend in federal custody is a year they are not a problem for anyone. You are sure?" "I am sure that having my wife connected to the prosecution of the people who targeted our son creates a specific kind of deterrent that other arrangements cannot replicate." He paused. "I am also sure it is the right thing to do. That is a consideration I am working on taking more seriously." She looked at him across the kitchen table. She said, "Who are you and what did you do with Rowan Hale?" He said, "I am working on a renovation. It is ongoing." She called Callahan back and said yes. The trials moved through their processes over the following months. She prepared her testimony carefully, reviewed documents with the federal prosecutors, told the truth in the specific organized way that made truth useful in a legal context. Rowan provided additional security during those months without being asked. He did not interfere with the process. He did not ask to know what she was saying. He made sure she was safe going in and coming out, and let the rest of it be hers. That she thought was what partnership actually looked like in practice, not the absence of complication. The presence of someone who could hold the weight of it alongside you without needing to control the outcome. In February, with Eli walking everywhere and getting into everything with the reckless certainty of someone who has decided that falling is simply the price of speed, Nora was reviewing a contract in her home office when she heard laughter from the hallway. Rowan's, which she had heard before, but which still registered as something worth noting, and Eli's, that whole-body infant laughter that holds nothing back. She got up from the desk and went to the doorway. Rowan was on the floor of the hallway in his work clothes on his hands and knees. Eli was on his back, gripping his father's collar with both fists, laughing at the ceiling. Some game whose rules had been invented between them in a language Nora did not have access to. Rowan said something to Eli in a low voice. Eli laughed harder. She stood in the doorway and watched them. She thought about what Rowan had said to Eli that first night in the hospital. "I am your father, and I am not going anywhere." She had heard it then as a claim, a declaration of ownership over a situation he had just discovered. She understood it differently now. It had been a promise made to a child too young to hold it in a language of commitment that Rowan Hale had spent his entire adult life believing was not available to him. He was keeping it. Every day in the specific, unglamorous texture of ordinary life, he was keeping it. Not because it was easy, because he had decided it was the thing he was gonna do. She was 4 months pregnant. She had known for 3 weeks, and had not yet told him, which she recognized was a slight form of self-deception, since what she actually wanted was to sit with the knowledge for a little longer, before it became shared and organized and incorporated into plans. She wanted to feel the fullness of it privately for just a little more time. There was nothing wrong with that. She told him that evening, after Eli was asleep in the kitchen, snow coming down past the window above the sink. "There is something I want to tell you," she said. He turned from the counter where he was pouring coffee and looked at her with the full attention he gave things he considered important. She told him. He set the coffee down. He crossed the kitchen. He put both hands on either side of her face, that particular gesture he had used twice before in their history together, at the moments when he was feeling something large enough that his usual containment was not sufficient for it. When he said, "July," she said, "approximately." He said nothing else. He pressed his forehead to hers and stood there, and she felt him breathing slow and deliberate and completely unperformed. And she understood that this was what it looked like when Rowan Hale encountered something he had no protocol for, and was not trying to construct one. After a while, he said, "Eli is going to be insufferable about this." She laughed, which was not what she had expected to do, and he smiled against her forehead, which was not something she had expected from him either. There was, she understood, a great deal she had not expected. She had not expected to be here, in this house, in this life, with this man, who was in the process of becoming someone she recognized more fully than she had the first time she loved him. She had not expected it to feel less like going back and more like arriving somewhere for the first time. She had not expected the specific quality of this. Standing in a kitchen at night, in a house that contained her sleeping son, and her complicated marriage and her work, and her choices, and all the things that made her who she was. Feeling that she was in the right place, not because it was safe. It was not entirely safe. It would never be entirely safe. That was the true cost of the life they were living, and she had entered it with open eyes, and she would keep paying that cost. And there would be days when the weight of it was real and heavy and demanded more from her than she thought she had. But she was here. She had chosen to be here. Not from fear, not from desperation, not from running out of other options. She had chosen it with full knowledge and full agency, and the particular kind of strength that comes from knowing exactly what you are walking into, and deciding to walk in anyway. Some months later, in a summer that came in warm and unhurried over the Westchester property, Nora sat on the back steps in the early evening and watched Rowan teach Eli to kick a soccer ball across the grass. Eli was 14 months old and had been walking with confidence for 4 months and considered himself an advanced practitioner of forward motion. He kicked the ball with his toe instead of the inside of his foot, sending it wobbling away at an unexpected angle, and chased after it with the full-body commitment of someone for whom physics is merely a suggestion to be tested. Rowan followed at a patient distance, retrieving the ball, repositioning it, crouching to show him again. Eli watched with the focused absorption he brought to things he was genuinely trying to learn, then kicked with his toe again. Different angle, same conviction. Rowan looked up at her from across the grass. She smiled at him. He shook his head and went back to repositioning the ball, and she could see from where she sat that he was trying not to smile. Inside the house, in the room that had been prepared with the same attention as Eli's nursery, a crib stood assembled. Rowan had built it himself. It had taken most of a Saturday afternoon and had involved a focused profanity she had found deeply reassuring in its humanity. He had not asked for help. He had read the instructions, once set them aside, and proceeded from the logic of the thing itself. The crib was solid and level, and had been inspected twice before he was satisfied with it. She was 6 weeks from her due date. The second pregnancy had been different from the first in the ways that had mattered most. Shared, expected, welcomed into the open air of a life that was being built rather than endured. Rowan had been at every appointment. He had opinions about names, most of them wrong, which she had told him directly, and he had disagreed with her directly, and they had argued about it with the specific pleasure of two people who have learned that disagreement is not the same as danger. The evening settled around the property. The security cameras blinked their steady rhythm at the corners of the grounds. The world outside the stone walls continued to be what it was, requiring constant navigation and clear eyes, and the willingness to make difficult choices and then own them completely. She was good at all of that. She had been good at it for years. The difference now was that she did not have to be good at it alone. Eli abandoned the soccer ball and ran toward her across the grass. On his sturdy legs, arms out for balance, face arranged in the concentrated expression of someone who has decided that speed matters more than caution. Rowan was right behind him. Long strides, easy watching. She opened her arms. Eli ran into them warm and in motion, and she held him and felt him immediately begin to squirm, because stillness was something he had not yet agreed to as a general principle. Rowan reached the steps and sat down beside her, close enough that their arms touched. He rested his hand on the curve of her belly. that quiet gesture he had developed over the past months, and looked out over the property in the last of the evening light. He said, "I have been thinking about what you said at the ceremony." She said, "Which part?" "The part about the difference between the first version and this one. About why that difference matters." She waited. "I think I understand it now." In a way, I did not. Then he said, "The first time I was protecting something that already existed. The structure, the arrangement. I thought that was the thing worth protecting." She said, "And now I understand that what I am trying to protect is not a structure." He paused. "It is you, the actual person, not the role you occupy or the function you serve, but you specifically." He looked at her. "It changes everything about how you operate, when what you are protecting is real." She sat with that for a moment. "Yes," she said, "it does." The evening completed itself around them. The light moved from gold through copper into the deep blue of early dark. Eli grew heavy against her shoulder, the particular surrender of a small body to sleep. The baby moved inside her, a slow, definitive shift, and Rowan's hand registered it immediately. His attention moving there, with the quiet focus she had come to know well. He did not speak. He did not need to. She felt his hand and felt the movement, and they sat together on the steps of the house they were building a life inside of. And it was not simple, and it was not entirely safe, and it was nothing like what she had imagined when she was young enough to believe that love was mostly a matter of finding the right person and then having things become easier. It was not easier. It was something better than easier. It was real and chosen and built from the specific materials of two people who had failed each other and learned from the failing and decided to try again with full knowledge of the cost. She had learned in the particular hard school of everything that had brought her here that real was rarer than safe and more worth having and worth every difficult thing it cost to find and keep. Eli slept on her shoulder. Rowan's hand rested where it was. The last light went out of the sky, and the first stars came through faint and steady. The same stars over the stone walls and the security cameras in the grass, where a small boy had chased a soccer ball with complete conviction. She stayed where she was. She did not need to be anywhere else.